Hey there, and welcome inside Studio 34. This is the FanDuel Hurry Up. I'm Frank Stanfield, joined today by number fire analyst Jim Sonis. We're going to jump right into the conference championship round, starting off with the value plays in DFS this weekend, specifically on FanDuel. Jim, you like Jared Goff. I've heard plenty of times throughout the season how much you love Jared Goff. Why do you like him this weekend?
Yeah, I'm always a big Jared Goff fan, but I think when you look at this specific slate, there is a lot of value in getting a quarterback who is playing indoors because we could see some potentially funky weather up in Kansas City. And in addition to that, Jared Goff is just cheaper than the other quarterbacks on the slate. He is $8,000, Patrick Mahomes is $9,000, and Drew Brees is $8,800. So you're getting $800 savings for Jared Goff compared to those two guys. And I think that can go a long way when you're trying to squeeze in guys like Michael Thomas, Travis Kelce, Alvin Kamara, and Todd Gurley. That goes a really long way, but Goff actually does have a path to a potential good game this weekend. We saw him play well in the Superdome back in week number 9. Now, you'll know pretty quickly that was with Cooper Kupp in that game. And the Saints did not have Marcus Davenport, but the Saints also will not have Sheldon Rankins for this weekend. So I kind of think things do balance out a bit where we could see Jared Goff play well in this game. You'll note the home road splits too for Jared Goff. He plays much better in LA than he does on the road. But a lot of that is due to that one bad game in Chicago where it was crazy cold against a really good pass defense. Goff, outside of that one game, was still an above average passer from an efficiency perspective when he left Los Angeles. So I think that there is a scenario in which Jared Goff does very well this weekend as he plays inside against a middling pass defense. So to me, I think there is enough reason here to justify saving a little bit of salary, going with Jared Goff at $8,000, and allowing those savings to help you get higher upside other positions as well.
Jared Goff, $8,000 this weekend in the conference championship round. Remember, in week 9 against the Saints, he threw for 391 yards and 3 touchdowns. Hopefully, he can come close to replicating that once again this weekend. Moving on, we have Damien Williams and the Kansas City Chiefs hosting the New England Patriots. Number Fire has Damien Williams projected for 96 total yards, right around 3 receptions. He's only $7,200 on FanDuel. Jim, why do you like Damien Williams so much this weekend?
A lot of it comes down to what you mentioned. That salary for Damien Williams is super low because he's cheaper than James White. He is cheaper than Sony Michel, cheaper than both the top backs in the Saints and Rams given. I think if you want a quasi workhorse running back, this is the cheapest you can spend on FanDuel at $7,200. And I think that's just too cheap for a guy who played the role that Williams did last week. In that game, he played 75% of the snaps, 25 carries, and the big thing that I love about Williams, 6 targets. That is a huge thing when those targets are tied to a guy who is as good as Patrick Mahomes. The other thing about about Damien Williams that I like is that he is cheaper, as mentioned, than Sony Michel, and Michel is a game flow dependent back. So if the Patriots get down, Michel's probably not going to get the rock, but Williams is a guy who can be viable pretty much no matter what the game script may be. Now we could see people potentially pivot away from Williams this week because Spencer Ware could be back. He got in limited practices last week before eventually being inactive, but I think even if Ware does come back, it's probably still going to be Williams' backfield. We saw him get that contract extension earlier this year. He's been really good when the Chiefs have used him. So I kind of think this is Damien Williams' backfield to lose at this point. So for $7,200, there is a lot working in his favor. The Chiefs, they're at home, they're favored. I think that's enough justification for me to spend down on him, even when there are a lot of really tempting running backs on this slate.
Damien Williams has scored in his last 5 games. He's gone over 100 yards in 3 of those as well. So really just a ton to like here about Williams. Not worried about Spencer Ware either. Also have to throw it out there. Just another player that Adam Gase let slip through his fingertips while with Miami. Moving on, we have Sammy Watkins. And Jim, I'm going to give you all the credit in the world. While he wasn't amazing last week, Sammy Watkins was solid. He looked spry. And our colleague, Greg Sussman, was killing you for advocating Sammy Watkins, but he looked pretty good.
Yeah, Greg turned out to be right once Watkins fumbled, though. So I got to tip my cap to Greg on that one, too. We can both be right, I think. I will go with that one there for sure. But I think the good thing about Watkins in that first game back is that he looked good, as you mentioned, and he played a ton. He played 93% of the snaps in that game for the Chiefs. He had 8 targets, and one of those targets was in the red zone. If we look at the full games that Watkins has played this year for the Chiefs, he has a 20% target market share. That is not as high as Travis Kelce Kelce or Tyreek Hill, but it's still a really good number. He also has 20% of the Chiefs' red zone targets in those games, which is second on the team behind Travis Kelce. The other thing I like about Sammy Watkins for this week is that when you think about Bill Belichick as a defensive guru, he always tries to take away the opposing team's best target. Now, that could be Travis Kelce or it could be Tyreek Hill. That is not going to be Sammy Watkins if you're thinking of this from a scheming perspective. So I kind of think that if you're Bill Belichick, you try to force the Chiefs to beat you through Sammy Watkins. And that makes me like Sammy Watkins even more for this week. He is $5,600 on the 2-game slate for FanDuel. I think there is a path to a really good day. You're tying your assets to Patrick Mahomes, which I love as well. So there are some really good, cheap wide receivers for this 2-game slate. But for me, it's really hard to stay away from Sammy Watkins, given how much and how well he played last week outside of that fumble.
Sammy Watkins, 20% of the target share this year in the games that he played with the Chiefs. At just $5,600, you're getting exposure to that offense. I'm with you, Jim. Sign me up. Moving on, we have Ted Ginn inside the Superdome this week going up against the Los Angeles Rams. And Jim, we all saw it last week on the first play of the game. Drew Brees trying to take a shot down the field, just underthrew Ted Ginn. It was a phenomenal play by the defense as well. You got to give credit where it's due. But if he leads him out in front, we're talking about Ted Ginn scoring a long touchdown in that game. Why else do you like him going up against the Rams defense?
Yeah, don't remind my bankroll of that play happening there, Frank, because that was a catastrophe. Ted Ginn so close to a huge day at a superbly high ownership, but it was justified there. And I think even though the price has gone up on Ted Ginn to $5,300, there's still a lot of juice there. You mentioned playing inside. I love that for Ted Ginn. It always makes me more welcoming towards wide receivers when I get them indoors. On top of that, Ted Ginn, despite the fact that he's always kind of been this gadgety type player, has never really been hugely involved in any offense that he's been in. He's been good this year for the Saints, and they have used him quite a bit. He has 16% of the Saints' targets in the games he has played. That is in addition to getting 38% of their targets at least 16 yards downfield. So when Drew Brees decides to go deep and Ted Ginn is there, the ball is pretty much always going to Ted Ginn. As you mentioned, he could have had a really big game last week, but overall, the usage was still there for Ted Ginn. He had 3 targets, at least 16 yards downfield in that one too. And I'm kind of hoping people are turned off by the box score of last week, because the box score wasn't that great for Ted Ginn, under 50 yards receiving, but if you watch the game, you know the potential for a really good game was there. So I want to say some salary wide receiver. Again, as mentioned with Watkins, I think that Ted Ginn is the other really good route for doing so. So Ted Ginn, to me, I think makes sense to go back to him once again for the conference championships.
Jim, true story. I had Ted Ginn to score the first touchdown in that game at plus 1,600. So you can just imagine how I felt watching that interception taking place. And then the Eagles proceed to go down the field and score a touchdown with Jordan Matthews. Yada, yada. He's $5,300 this weekend going up against the Rams. I really like him at that price. Chris Hogan of the New England Patriots going in to face the Kansas City Chiefs. Jim, Chris Hogan let a lot of people down this year from a season-long and DFS perspective, but you need to find somewhere to save money this week. He's only $5,200 going up against the Chiefs. Why do you like Chris Hogan?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to Ted Ginn, where it's pretty volatile for Chris Hogan, but the usage has been there for him since Josh Gordon left the team. We've now got a 3-game sample on this Patriots offense since Josh Gordon left the team, and Hogan's role has been okay. He has 16% of the team's targets in those 3 games. He did have 11 in one game against the Jets, so it's been kind of an up and down role, but overall, 16% of the targets, that's not a bad number for Chris Hogan. He has 31% of their deep targets and 25% of the red zone targets. So there is a path for Chris Hogan where he could catch a deep ball, maybe get one in the red zone and score a touchdown, in which case at $5,200, he's going to pay off pretty easily for you. The other thing I like about Chris Hogan for this weekend is that when you think about this Chiefs secondary, you kind of want bigger bodied wide receivers to face them. And that's not going to be Edelman. It's probably going to be more Chris Hogan. He is 6'1". He's got some speed to him. That's more the archetype of wide receiver I want to have facing this Chiefs defense than the Edelman type. Now, Edelman's still going to get his targets. Like, he's still going to potentially beast out in this game. I'm not saying don't use him, but when Hogan is $5,200 and such a big savings from guys like Edelman and James White, I kind of think that Hogan does make sense if you're trying to get exposure to this Patriots passing offense. They're facing the Chiefs, an offense that can put up points in a hurry. We could see a scenario in which the Patriots are throwing the ball a ton. And if they do so, that will further inflate the expected targets for Chris Hogan. So I kind of think he makes a lot of sense for this weekend. He has burned me as well throughout the season, both for best ball and for season long. But I think there is enough here to justify spending down on him this weekend at $5,200, making him another potentially cheap wide receiver we can turn to at times.
Let me tell you something, brother. Make sure you get Chris Hogan in your lineup this weekend because only $5,200. And for what it's worth, in week 6 against the Chiefs, he had his season high with 78 receiving yards. Moving on, we have Josh Hill of the New Orleans Saints, tight end here, going up against the Los Angeles Rams. This has been a common theme. Look, you want to spend up for guys like Patrick Mahomes, and you want to get Alvin Kamara, and you want to get whoever else in your lineup. You got to find somewhere to save money. Josh Hill this weekend, only $4,600. What do you like about Josh Hill, Jim?
Yeah, when you look at tight ends on this slate, it's Travis Kelce, who has this superb market share, super involved in his offense. He's awesome. But then after that, there's really nobody else at tight end. So if I'm not using Travis Kelce, I kind of want to spend as far down as I can. And Josh Hill is a guy at $4,600 who at least is on the field. I think that's encouraging for a tight end for this weekend. Hill ran 19 routes in the Saints divisional round win over the Eagles. That was most in the team compared to 15 for Benjamin Watson. That data via Pro Football Focus. Hill had 3 targets in that one. Watson had 1. And if you look back in their first game against the Rams, they did use their tight ends as Benjamin Watson had a really sick catch in that game, also had a touchdown. So we know the Saints are willing to use their tight ends. They've got this huge implied team total, and Hill seems to have moved ahead of Benjamin Watson in the pass-catching tight end role. So, again, I'm trying to spend down at tight end where I can for this week. Hill does not have a great role, but again, 3 targets last week. He is running some routes. I kind of think that I want to just give myself the best odds at scoring a touchdown with my salary-saving tight end. And for Josh Hill, given the offense he is tied to, given the fact that he is the pass-catching tight end on this team, I think Hill is the most logical route for doing so. Now, you could wind up, getting no points. That's certainly a risk, but I think Josh Hill's in play along with both Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee as potential ways to save some salary at tight end.
Look, it's not much, but Hill tied a season high in receptions last week with 3 against the Eagles. Again, this is just you're trying to get everyone else in your lineup. You got to spend down at the tight end position. One way to do so is getting Josh Hill in your lineup at just $4,600. When we come back, we'll move into the stacks that we want to use this weekend in the conference championship round. That is Jim Sonis of Number Fire. I am Frank Sample. We'll be right back right after this. Welcome back to the FanDuel Hurry Up. I am Frank Stanfield, joined by Number Fire analyst Jim Sonis, continuing to talk about the DFS slate this weekend, specifically on FanDuel. And Jim, I want to get into some stacks here, specifically Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. This one seems like it might be a little bit self-explanatory, but still, I wanted to get your reasoning as to why you like these two this weekend.
Yeah, I'm really hoping people are scared away from this game because of the weather. When you look at the weather for this game, it's projected to be very chilly in Kansas City, and people could use that as a justification for not using these two guys together. But at the same time, in general, I don't care too much about temperature. It's more so about wind. And the wind for this game, at least when I looked here on Wednesday, not projected to be too high. And as long as that stays the case, I think we could see another good game from Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. Last week was cold too. We still saw Mahomes hooking up with Kelce continuously in that game, just a touchdown away from having a huge game. Mahomes just had, some bad touchdown luck with the Tyreek Hill rushing touchdown, the Damien Williams rushing touchdown. So I think both those guys could have had huge days against the Colts, just didn't quite have the touchdowns work in their favor. We do have Sammy Watkins back for the Chiefs now, and Travis Kelce has been good. Even when Watkins has been out there, he has 26% of the Chiefs' targets, 32% of their deep targets, and 24% of their red zone targets in the games that Watkins has played at least half the snaps this year. So Kelce's still a big part of this offense. He is the only tight end on this slate who has a legitimate role. So if you're paying up at tight end, it's going to be Travis Kelce. There are no other options. And I think when you view him as being a wide receiver, it is pretty easy to swallow that salary of Kelce, which is in the mid $7,000. So Looking at this slate, I think I do prefer Drew Brees at quarterback over Patrick Mahomes, but Mahomes to me pretty easily number 2 on that list. So I like this stack quite a bit. I think that, again, it could have blown up last week. Mahomes has at least 17.82 FanDuel points in every game so far this year. So I'll take that safety, even if it is a little bit chilly in Kansas City on Sunday.
Jim, you mentioned the weather, but you didn't mention this crazy blood wolf moon lunar eclipse thing that we have. It just seems like everything's setting up for the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend for them to all go off. And if they all go off, that means Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce is part of that, which means they should be in your fantasy lineups this weekend. Moving on, I mentioned the Chiefs. We've got more Chiefs for you. That's right. We got the Damien Williams and Chiefs defense stack. And I always think it's interesting to hear your take on these, Jim, because I never really thought about it this way, but you like when you expect a defense to play well and how that can kind of lead itself to the running back for that same exact team. There's kind of a correlation there, right?
Absolutely. I think about when you're filling out a tournament lineup, you're kind of making assumptions. Like if I assume that the Chiefs play well, that means their defense should do well for DFS. And it also means they're probably going to be leading late, which would lead to more volume for Damien Williams, which is why I think that this stack does make a lot of sense. And this Patriots team is a different team when they're on the road compared to when they are at home. They've allowed 4.83 yards per carry when they've been on the road, which is a pretty big number compared to 4.53 when they're at home. And the defense has allowed 24 points per game on the road compared to 17 points per game at home. And that does include games against Josh McCown and Derek Anderson. So it's not as if they faced this insane lineup of quarterbacks on the road. And this time they're facing Patrick Mahomes. So I think there's a very real scenario in which this Chiefs team gets up early and they can allow those really good pass rushers to get after Tom Brady. This pass rush has been phenomenal in Arrowhead this year. The defense for the Chiefs has a 9.6% sack rate at home compared to 5.7% when they go on the road. So if we get a scenario where Patrick Mahomes gives this Chiefs team a lead early, that means they can lean on Damien Williams and that defensive line can pin its ears back and get after Tom Brady. That is beneficial for both Damien Williams and for the Chiefs defense. So I think if you're using Williams, it increases the odds that the Chiefs defense does well. So I think pairing them together is a really logical way if you're assuming the Chiefs play well in this game.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense here, Jim. And I'm sure Bob Sutton is going to have this Chiefs defense fired up, especially after what they just did last week against the Indianapolis Colts, pretty much throwing them around. And it seemed like there was a batted ball on a passing attempt every single other throw for Andrew Luck. I'm sure they'll be fired up once again against the Patriots this weekend. Moving on, we have Tom Brady and James White. The same James White that had 15 receptions a week ago against the Los Angeles Chargers. Jim, there's just something about Tom Brady and James White once the playoffs turn on that these two just click together. Do we see that again this week against the Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, I think based on what we saw last week, as you mentioned, Frank, it kind of seems like the game plan for the Patriots this week could go one of two ways. They could decide to ride Sony Michel and try to keep that Chiefs offense off the field, which I would not blame them for doing so. And that could lead you away from James White and towards Sony Michel. But that also assumes that the Chiefs don't score, because if you got Sony Michel out there, it means that the Patriots have a lead, and it's going to be pretty hard to stop this Chiefs defense. So I think if this Patriots offense puts up a lot of points, it should be on the shoulder of Tom Brady and through the hands of James White. This Chiefs defense does just funnel targets towards running backs. They allowed 102 receiving yards to Melvin Gordon, 69 to TJ Yeldon, 53 to James White in their first meeting, 78 yards to Duke Johnson, and 85 to David Johnson. So teams have been shredding this Chiefs defense through the passing game via their running backs. That could lead to a lot of James White. And James White has been super involved in this offense since Josh Gordon left, with 26% of the team's targets and 30% of their red zone targets in this 3-game sample. As you mentioned, 15 catches for him last week, 17 targets for James White, and he played 46% of the snaps, even though the Chiefs got out, or the Patriots got ahead early in that game. That is a game script that set up more for Michel than it did for James White, but White still had a respectable snap rate and got a ton of volume. So I think there are reasons to be concerned about Tom Brady in this game, given the fact that in general, he doesn't have a lot of receivers who can get separation. But James White is one of those guys out of the backfield who can get open and give Tom Brady a safety blanket. So if you assume the Patriots keep pace in this game, I kind of think it is through James White and Tom Brady. So I'm totally in favor of stacking them up if you think the Patriots will play well on Sunday.
Patriots are getting 3 points this weekend against the Kansas City Chiefs, so the odds makers certainly expect this game to be close and competitive. On top of that, the Chiefs gave up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs this season. For all those reasons, we're in on James White and Tom Brady together. Drew Brees and Michael Thomas inside the Superdome going up against the Los Angeles Rams. Jim, this is another stack that you like this weekend. Tell us why, but I just kind of want to throw a little curveball in here as well. Does the fact that Aqib Talib is on the other side here worry you at all about Michael Thomas?
Oh, definitely it should, because the Rams defense is totally different when Aqib Talib is out there. They're allowing 7.2 yards per attempt with Aqib Talib out there compared to 8.83 when Aqib Talib is not on the field, according to the Quan Edge. So it's a really big difference when Aqib Talib is out there. But it's also a big difference for the Saints when Ted Ginn is out there, because he gives you this field stretching, member of the offense who can ensure that they give some more space to Michael Thomas. Because in games that Ted Ginn has played this year, Michael Thomas has 31% of the Saints targets, and he still gets 23% of their targets, at least 16 yards downfield. So it's not as if Michael Thomas is just working underneath. He does still get some deep targets when Ted Ginn is out there. It just means he gets more targets underneath, and Thomas also gets 33% of their red zone targets when Ted Ginn is active. So Aqib Talib is a really good player, and I think that he totally changes the dynamic of this Rams defense. But so does Ted Ginn on the other side of this one. So that's why I like Michael Thomas this week. As far as Drew Brees goes, at least 16 FanDuel points in every home game he has played this year. So I kind of think when you're looking at this slate, if you want to avoid the cold in KC and you want to get a home quarterback who is favored, your only option is Drew Brees. But he is a really good one. He has shown he can still ball out in the dome. I know he had a couple of underthrows last week, and that, certainly is a thing to consider. But Drew Brees, he's still got it. He can still rack up big points on FanDuel. So if you assume this game stays close, I think that means a lot of passing for the Saints, a lot of Michael Thomas, and a lot of Drew Brees as well. So I'm totally in favor of stacking those two up, even with Aqib Talib being out there for the Rams.
Just a little reminder, Drew Brees threw for 346 yards and 4 touchdowns last time they faced the Los Angeles Rams in their Week 9 matchup. Just another reason to like Drew Brees and Michael Thomas heading into this weekend. Jim loves these running back defense stacks here, and we're getting into another one, but it's not as traditional as you'd expect. It's not Alvin Kamara in the Saints defense. He likes the Saints defense, but he likes stacking them with Mark Ingram. Why is that, Jim?
It's pretty much purely a salary-based play for Mark Ingram because he has $6,100 for this week. And in general, I prefer Alvin Kamara by a pretty wide margin. If you look at their usage in the divisional round, it really did show why. But also you think about that game. The Saints were trailing for a pretty good portion of it. They were down 14-0 early, and that is a game script that sets up better for Alvin Kamara than it does for Mark Ingram. But even with that game script being negative for the Saints, Ingram still had 9 carries and 2 targets and played 40% of the snaps. Also had a pretty long run in there. So it's not as if he totally disappeared. And there's always a chance that Mark Ingram gets a touchdown. I think that could be enough at this salary, given the lack of, just general bodies on this slate, because it is such a short slate. And if Mark Ingram does well, that means the Saints defense should be playing from ahead. That can allow them to get to Jared Goff, potentially get, an interception, a sack, a fumble, things like that. So it's kind of the same thing we discussed with Damien Williams. If you assume that the Saints are leading, that could lead to additional Mark Ingram and additional opportunities for this defense. So in general, I'd rather get to Alvin Kamara. I prefer him by a pretty wide margin, but if you need to save some salary and you make the assumption that the Saints do roll in this game, it would benefit well for both Mark Ingram and the Saints defense. So I think if you're going to use Mark Ingram, you pretty much have to roll him out there with the Saints defense as well.
Jim Son is doing something a little bit different here, using Mark Ingram and the Saints defense as a potential stack going up against the Rams in the conference championship. Finally, we have Jared Goff and Todd Gurley as a stack here, expecting those two to hook up quite a few times throughout this game. Jim, I have to throw another curveball your way. I'm sorry, but does CJ Anderson worry you at all here?
Yeah, for sure. I think that that's why I'm not going to be on Todd Gurley if I were playing cash games for this week. I'm not a huge fan of cash games in general for a 2-game slate, but if I were playing them, probably wouldn't be huge into Todd Gurley because CJ Anderson could always come in and take away those goal line carries. But even with CJ Anderson playing a lot last week, Todd Gurley still had pretty good usage. He had 16 carries and 2 targets in that game and played 57% of the snaps. The reasoning behind CJ Anderson, at least according to Sean McVay and the broadcaster in the game, was that they were worried about the conditioning for Todd Gurley. You give him an extra game to, get that game conditioning back, and what should be a game that is tight, I kind of think that could lead to an expanded role once again for Todd Gurley here. The other thing I like about Todd Gurley in this matchup is that Sheldon Rankins is out for the Saints, unfortunately, because he is a great player, and it's a huge loss for the Saints team. They allowed 3.83 yards per carry with without Sheldon Rankins this year, compared to 3.41 with him. That's according to the Quant Edge. That should open up some additional rushing lanes for Todd Gurley here. Gurley also a factor in the passing game. We saw Malcolm Brown score a receiving touchdown against the Saints in this first matchup. So I don't think Gurley is a must for this week, but if you make the assumption that this game stays close, I kind of think that means that Todd Gurley should be in there quite a bit, which bodes well for him, and it also bodes well for Jared Goff. Again, allowing you to save a little bit of salary at quarterback and spend up for guys like Gurley and like Michael Thomas. So I do like this matchup a pretty decent amount for the Rams, and I think if they keep it close, we should see a lot of Gurley, and if that does happen, he could go bananas here. So Todd Gurley, pretty intriguing. I'm definitely not opposed to stacking him with Jared Goff.
Jared Goff and Todd Gurley, the final stack here of the weekend, heading into the conference championships. Jim Sannes, a little worried about CJ Anderson, says, might not want to use Todd Gurley in cash games, but we still do know the upside that he possesses, especially when it comes to catching balls from Jared Goff. That is Jim Sannes of Number Fire. I am Frank Stamfel. Make sure you head on over to the Fantasy Sports Network YouTube channel for more where this came from. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you guys tomorrow.